Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects by Giorgio Vasari.
Life of Michelangelo Buonarroti. The spirit and genius of Michelangelo could not rest without doing something, and since he was not able to paint, he set to work on a piece of marble, intending to carve from it 4 figures in the round and larger than life, including a dead Christ for his own delight and to pass the time, and because, as they used to say, the exercise of the hammer kept him healthy in body. The Christ, taken down from the cross, is supported by Our Lady, by Nicodemus, who bends down and assists her, planted firmly on his feet in a forceful attitude, and by one of the Marys, who also gives her aid, perceiving that the mother, overcome by grief, is failing in strength and not able to uphold him. Nor is there anywhere to be seen a dead form equal to that of Christ, who, sinking with the limbs hanging limp, lies in an attitude wholly different not only from that of any other work by Michelangelo, but from that of any other figure that was ever made. A laborious work is this, a rare achievement in a single stone, and truly divine. But, as will be related hereafter, it remained unfinished and suffered from many misfortunes, although Michelangelo had intended that it should serve to adorn his own tomb, at the foot of that altar where he thought to place it. It happened in the year 1546 that Antonio de Sangallo died, whereupon, there being now no one to direct the building of San Pietro, many suggestions were made by the superintendents to the Pope as to who should have it. Finally, His Holiness, inspired, I believe, by God, resolved to send for Michelangelo. But he, when asked to take Antonio's place, refused it, saying, in order to avoid such a burden, that architecture was not his proper art. And in the end, entreaties not availing, the Pope commanded that he should accept it, whereupon, to his great displeasure, and against his wish, he was forced to undertake that enterprise. And one day, among others, that he went to San Pietro to see the wooden model that Sangallo had made, and to examine the building, he found there the whole Sangallo faction, who, crowding before Michelangelo, said to him in the best terms at their command that they rejoiced that the charge of the building was to be his, and that the model was a field where there would never be any want of pasture. "You speak the truth," answered Michelangelo, meaning to infer, as he declared to a friend, that it was good for sheep and oxen who knew nothing of art. And afterwards he used to say publicly that Sangallo had made it wanting in lights, that it had on the exterior too many ranges of columns one above another, and that with its innumerable projections, pinnacles, and subdivisions of members, it was more akin to the German manner than to the good method of the ancients or to the gladsome and beautiful modern manner. And in addition to this, it was possible to save 50 years of time and more than 300,000 crowns of money in finishing the building, and to execute it with more majesty, grandeur, and facility, greater beauty and convenience, and better ordered design. This he afterwards proved by a model that he made, in order to bring it to the form which the work is now seen constructed. And thus he demonstrated that what he said was nothing but the truth. This model cost him 25 crowns, and was made in a fortnight. That of Sangallo, as has been related, cost 4,000, and took many years to finish. From this and other circumstances, it became evident that the fabric was but a shop and business for making money, and that it would be continually delayed, with the intention of never finishing it by those who had undertaken it as a means of profit. Such methods did not prove our upright Michelangelo, and in order to get rid of all these people, while the Pope was forcing him to accept the office of architect to the work, he said to them openly one day that they should use all the assistance of their friends and do all they could to prevent him from entering that office, because, if he were to undertake such a charge, he would not have one of them about the building. Which words, spoken in public, were taken very ill, as may be believed, and were the reasons that they conceived a great hatred against him, which increased every day as they saw the whole design being changed, both within and without, so that they would scarcely let him live, seeking out daily new and various devices to harass him, as will be related in the proper place. Finally, the Pope issued a motu proprio, creating him head of that fabric, with full authority, and giving him power to do or undo whatever he chose, and to add, take away, or vary anything at his pleasure. And he decreed that all the officials employed in the work should be subservient to his will. Whereupon Michelangelo, seeing the great confidence and trust that the Pope placed in him, desired, in order to prove his generosity, that it should be declared in the motu proprio that he was serving in the fabric for the love of God and without any reward. But it is true that the Pope had formerly granted him the ferry over the river at Parma, which yielded him about 600 crowns, but he lost it at the death of Duke Pier Luigi Farnese, and in exchange for it he was given a chancellery at Rimini, a post of less value. About that he showed no concern, and although the Pope sent him money several times by way of salary, he would never accept it, to which witness is borne by Messer Alessandro Ruffini, chamberlain to the Pope at that time, and by Messer Pier Giovanni Aliotti, Bishop of Forli. Finally, the model that had been made by Michelangelo was approved by the Pope, which model diminished San Pietro in size, but gave it greater grandeur, to the satisfaction of all those who have judgment, although some who profess to be good judges, which in fact they are not, do not approve of it. He found that the 4 principal piers built by Bramante and left by Antonio di Sangallo, which had to support the weight of the tribune, were weak, and those he partly filled up, and beside them he made 2 winding or spiral staircases, in which is an ascent so easy that the beasts of burden can climb them, carrying all the materials to the very top, and men on horseback likewise can go up to the uppermost level of the arches. The first cornice above the arches he constructed of travertine, curving in a round, which is an admirable and graceful thing, and very different from any other, nor could anything better of that kind be done. He also made a beginning with the 2 great recesses of the transepts, and whereas formerly, under the direction of Bramante, Baldassarre, and Raffaello, as has been related, 8 tabernacles were being made on the side toward the Camposanto, and that plan was afterwards followed by Sangallo. Michelangelo reduced these to 3, with 3 chapels in the interior, and above them a vaulting of travertine, and a range of windows giving a brilliant light, which are varied in form and of sublime grandeur. But since these things are in existence, and are also to be seen in engraving, not only those of Michelangelo, but those of Sangallo as well, I will not set myself to describe them, for it is in no way necessary. Let it suffice to say that he set himself, with all possible diligence, to cause the work to be carried on in those parts where the fabric was to be changed in design, to the end that it might remain so solid and stable that it might never be changed by another, which was the wise provision of a shrewd and prudent intellect, because it is not enough to do good work, if further precautions are not taken, seeing that the boldness and presumption of those who might suppose to have knowledge, if credit were placed rather in their words than in their deeds, and at times the favor of such as knowing nothing, may give rise to many misfortunes. The Roman people, with the sanctification of the Pope, had a desire to give some useful, commodious, and beautiful form to the Campidoglio, and to furnish it with colonnades, ascents, and inclined approaches with and without steps, and also with the further adornment of the ancient statues that were already there, in order to embellish that place. For this purpose they sought the advice of Michelangelo, who made them a most beautiful and very rich design, in which, on the side where the Senator stands, toward the east, he arranged a facade of travertine and a flight of steps that ascends from two sides to meet on a level space, from which one enters into the center of the hall of that palace, with rich curving wings adorned with balusters that serve as supports and parapets. And there, to enrich that part, he caused to be placed on certain bases the two ancient figures in marble of recumbent river gods, each of 9 braccia and of that rare workmanship, one of which is the Tiber and the other the Nile. And between them, in a niche, is to go a Jove. On the southern side, where there is the palace of the Conservatory, in order that it might be made rectangular, there followed a rich and well-varied facade, with a loggia at the foot full of ornaments, doors, windows, and the like, of which some are already in place. On the other side from this, toward the north, below the araceli, there is to follow another similar facade, and before it, toward the west, is to be an ancient bastion-like steps, which will be almost level, with a border and parapet of balusters. Here will be the principal entrance, with a colonnade and bases on which will be placed all that wealth of noble statues in which the Campidoglio is now so rich. In the middle of the piazza, on a base in the form of an oval, is placed the famous bronze horse, on which is the statue of Marcus Aurelius, which the same Pope Paul caused to be removed from the Piazza di Laterano, where Sixtus IV had placed it. This edifice is now being made so beautiful that it is worthy to be numbered among the finest works that Michelangelo has executed, and it is being carried to completion at the present day under the direction of Messer Tommaso de' Cavalieri, a Roman gentleman who was, and still is, one of the greatest friends that Michelangelo ever had, as will be related hereafter. Pope Paul III had caused Sangallo, while he was alive, to carry forward the palace of the Farnese family, but the great upper cornice, to finish the roof on the outer side, had still to be constructed, and His Holiness desired that Michelangelo should execute it from his own designs and directions. Michelangelo, not being able to refuse the Pope, who so esteemed and favored him, caused a model of wood to be made, 6 braccia in length, and of the size that it was to be. And this he placed on one of the corners of the palace, so that it might show what effect the finished work would have. It pleased His Holiness and all Rome, and that part of it has since been carried to completion, which is now to be seen, proving to be the most varied and the most beautiful of all that have ever been known, whether ancient or modern. On this account, after Sangallo was dead, the Pope desired that Michelangelo should have charge of the whole fabric as well. And there he made the great marble window with the beautiful columns of variegated marble, which is over the principal door of the palace, with a large escutcheon of great beauty and variety in marble of Pope Paul III, the founder of that palace. Within the palace, he continued, above the first range of the court, the 2 other ranges, with the most varied, graceful, and beautiful windows, ornaments, and upper cornice that have ever been seen, so that, through the labors and the genius of that man, that court has now become the most handsome in Europe. He widened and enlarged the great hall, and set in order the front vestibule, and caused the vaulting of that vestibule to be constructed in a new variety of curve, in the form of a half oval. Now, in that year there was found at the Baths of Antonius a massive marble 7 braccia in every direction, in which there had been carved by the ancients a Hercules standing upon a mound, who was holding the bull by the horns, with another figure assisting him, and around that mound several figures of shepherds, nymphs, and different animals, a work of truly extraordinary beauty, showing figures so perfect in one single block without any additional pieces, which was judged to have been intended for a fountain. Michelangelo advised that it should be conveyed into the second court, and there restored so as to make it spout water in the original manner. All of which advice was approved, and the work is still being restored at the present day with great diligence by order of the Farnese family for that purpose. At that time, also, Michelangelo made a design for the building of a bridge across the river Tiber in a straight line with the Farnese Palace, to the end that it might be possible to go from that palace to another palace and gardens that they possessed in the Trastevere, and also to see at one glance, in a straight line, from the principal door which faces the Campo di Fiore, the court, the fountain, the Strada Giulia, the bridge, and the beauties of the other garden, even to the other door which opened on the Strada di Trastevere, a rare work, worthy of that pontiff and of the judgment, design, and art of Michelangelo. In the year 1547 died Sebastiano Vinziano, the friar of the Piombo, and Pope Paul, proposing that the ancient statues of his palace should be restored, Michelangelo willingly favored the Milanese sculptor Guglielmo della Porta, a young man of promise who had been recommended by the above-named Fra Sebastiano to Michelangelo, who, liking his work, presented him to the Pope for the restoration of those statues. And the matter went so far forward that Michelangelo obtained for him the office of the Piombo, and he then set to work on restoring the statues, some of which are to be seen in that palace at the present day. But Guglielmo, forgetting the benefits that he had received from Michelangelo, afterwards became one of his opponents. In the year 1549, there took place the death of Pope Paul III, whereupon, after the election of Pope Julius III, Cardinal Farnese gave orders for a grand tomb to be made for his kinsman Pope Paul by the hand of Fra Guglielmo, who arranged to erect it in San Pietro, below the first arch of the new church, beneath the tribune, which obstructed the floor of the church and was, in truth, not the proper place. Michelangelo advised most judiciously that it could not and should not stand there, and the Frate, believing that he was doing this out of envy, became filled with hatred against him. But afterwards he recognized that Michelangelo had spoken the truth, and that the fault was his, and that he had had the opportunity and had not finished the work, as will be related in another place. And to this I can bear witness, for the reason that in the year 1550 I had gone, by order of Pope Julius III, to Rome, to serve him, and very willingly for the love of Michelangelo, and I took part in that discussion. Michelangelo desired that the tomb should be erected in one of the niches where there is now the column of the possessed, which was the proper place, and I had so gone to work that Julius III was resolving to have his own tomb made in the other niche with the same design as that of Pope Paul, in order to balance that work. But the Frate, who had set himself against it, brought it about that his own was never finished after all, and that the tomb of the other pontiff was also not made, which had all been predicted by Michelangelo. In the same year, Pope Julius turned his attention to having a chapel of marble with 2 tombs constructed in the church of San Pietro a Montorio for a Cardinal Antonio di Monte, his uncle, and Messrs. Fabiano, his grandfather, the first founder of the greatness of that illustrious house. For this work, Vasari, having made designs and models, Pope Julius, who always esteemed the genius of Michelangelo, and loved Vasari, desired that Michelangelo should fix the price between them, and Vasari besought the Pope that he should prevail upon him to take it under his protection. Now Vasari had proposed Simone Mosca for the carving of his work, and Raffaello de Montelupo for the statues. But Michelangelo advised that no carvings of foliage should be made in it, not even in the architectural parts of the work, saying that where there are to be figures of marble, there must not be any other thing. Of which account Vasari feared that the work should be abandoned because it would look poor. But in fact, when he saw it finished, he confessed that Michelangelo had shown great judgment. Michelangelo would not have Montelupo make the statues, remembering how badly he had acquitted himself in those of his own tomb of Julius II, and he was content, rather, that they should be entrusted to Bartolomeo Ammanati, whom Vasari had proposed, although Buonarroti had something of a private grievance against him, as also against Nanni di Baccio Biggio, caused by a reason which, if one considers it well, seems slight enough, for when they were very young, moved rather by love of art than by desire to do wrong, they had entered with great pains into his house, and had taken from Antonio Mini, the disciple of Michelangelo, many sheets with drawings. But these were afterwards all restored to him by the order of the Tribunal of Eight, and at the intercession of his friend Messer Giovanni Norciati, canon of San Lorenzo, he would not have any other punishment inflicted on him. Vasari, when Michelangelo spoke to him of this matter, said to him, laughing, that it did not seem to him that they deserved any blame, and that he himself, if he had ever been able, would not have taken a few drawings only, but robbed him of everything by his hand that he might have been able to seize, merely for the sake of learning art. One must look kindly, as he said, on those who seek after excellence and also reward them, and therefore such men must not be treated like those who go about stealing money, household property, and other things of value. And so the matter was turned to a jest. This was the reason that a beginning was made with the work of the Montorio, and that in this same year Vasari and Ammanati went to have the marble conveyed from Carrara to Rome for the execution of that work. At that time Vasari was with Michelangelo every day, and one morning the Pope in his kindness gave them both leave that they might visit the 7 churches on horseback, for it was a holy year, and receive the pardon in company. Whereupon, while going from one church to another, they had many useful and beautiful conversations on art and every industry, and out of these Vasari composed a dialogue, which will be published at some more favorable opportunity, together with some things concerning art. In that year, Pope Julius III confirmed the motu proprio of Pope Paul III with regard to the building of San Pietro. And although much evil was spoken to him of Michelangelo by the friends of the Sangallo faction in the matter of that fabric of San Pietro, at that time the Pope would not listen to a word, for Vasari had demonstrated to him, as was the truth, that Michelangelo had given life to the building, and also persuaded his holiness that he should do nothing concerned with the design without the advice of Michelangelo. This promise the Pope kept ever afterwards, for neither at the Vigna Giulia did he do anything without his counsel, nor at the Belvedere, where there was built a staircase that is there now, in place of the semicircular staircase that came forward, ascending in 8 steps, and turned inward in 8 more steps, erected in the former times like Bramante in the great recess of the center of the Belvedere. And Michelangelo designed and caused to be built a very beautiful quadrangular staircase with balusters of peperino stone, which is there at the present day. Vasari had finished in that year the printing of his work, The Lives of the Painters, Sculptors, and Architects in Florence. Now he had not written the life of any living master, although some who were old were still alive, save only of Michelangelo and in the book were many records of circumstances that Vasari had received from his lips, his age and his judgment being the greatest among all the craftsmen. Giorgio, therefore, presented the work to him, and he received it very gladly, and not long afterwards, having read it, Michelangelo sent to him the following sonnet, written by himself, which I am pleased to include in this place in memory of his loving kindness. Sonnet translated into English. Whether with the style or colors you have art equal to nature, indeed the value has diminished in part, may her beauty make us more beautiful, as with learned man place you are there. To more worthy work, to verdure papers, what she lacks of value in part, in giving life to others, you take everything away, that if a century now no one disputes, in far off belle opere, at least Sedale, how convenient that the prescribed end arrives. Now the memories of others already extinguished lit up, returning to do now what are those, and you, in spite of them, it lives eternally. End of translated poem. Vasari departed for Florence, and left to Michelangelo the charge of having the work founded in the Monitorio. Now Messer Bindo Altaviti, the consul of the Florentine colony at that time, was much the friend of Vasari, and on this occasion Giorgio said to him that it would be well to have this work erected in the church of San Giovanni de Fiorentini, and that he had already spoken of it with Michelangelo, who would favor the enterprise, and that this would be a means of giving completion to that church. This proposal pleased Messer Bindo, and being very intimate with the Pope, he urged it warmly upon him, demonstrating that it would be well that the chapel and the tombs, which His Holiness was having executed for the Montorio, should be placed in the church of San Giovanni di Fiorentini, adding that the results would be that, with this occasion and this spur, the Fiorentine colony would undertake such expenditure that the church would receive its completion, and if His Holiness were to build the principal chapel, the other merchants would build 6 chapels, and then little by little all the rest. Whereupon the Pope changed his mind, and although the model for the work was already made and the price arranged, went to Montorio and sent for Michelangelo, to whom Vasari was writing every day, receiving answers from him according to the opportunities presented in the course of affairs. Michelangelo then wrote to Vasari on the 1st day of August 1550 of the change that the Pope had made, and these are his words written in his own hand. My dear Messer Giorgio, with regard to the founding of the work at San Pietro de Montorio, and how the Pope would not listen to a word, I wrote you nothing, knowing that you are kept informed by your man here. Now I must tell you what has happened, which is as follows. Yesterday morning, the Pope, having gone to the said Montorio, sent for me. I met him on the bridge on his way back, and had a long conversation with him about the tombs allotted to you. And in the end he told me that he was resolved that he would not place those tombs on that mount, but in the church of the Florentines. He sought from me my opinion, and also designs, and I encouraged him not a little, considering that by this means the said church would be finished. Respecting your 3 letters received, I have no pen wherewith to answer to such exalted matters. But if I should rejoice to be in some sort what you make me, I rejoice for no other reason, save you might have a servant who might be worth something. But I do not marvel that you, who restored dead men to life, should lengthen the life of the living, or rather that you should steal from death for an unlimited period those barely alive. To cut this short, such as I am wholly yours, Michelangelo Buonarroti. While these matters were being discussed, and the Florentine colony was seeking to raise money, certain difficulties arose, on account of which they came to no decision, and the affair grew cold. Meanwhile, Vasari and Eminent, having by this time had all the marbles quarried at Carrara, a great part of them were sent to Rome, and with them Eminent, through whom Vasari wrote to Buonarroti that he should ascertain from the Pope where he wanted the tomb, and after receiving his orders should have the work begun. The moment that Michelangelo received the letter, he spoke to His Holiness, and with his own hand he wrote the following resolution to Vasari. 13th of October, 1550. My dear Messer Giorgio, the instant that Bartholomew arrived here, I went to speak with the Pope, and having perceived that he wished to begin the work once more at the Montorio in the matter of the tombs, I looked for a mason from San Pietro. Tante Cosa heard this and insisted on sending one of his choosing, and I, to avoid contending with the man who commands the winds, have retired from the matter, because he, being a light-minded person, I would not care to be drawn into any entanglement. Enough that, in my opinion, there is no more thought to be given to the church of San Florentines. Fare you well, and come back soon. Nothing else occurs to me. Michelangelo used to call Monsignor di Forli Tante Cosa because he insisted on doing everything himself. Being chamberlain to the Pope, he had charge of the medals, jewels, cameos, little figures in bronze, pictures, drawings, and desired that everything should depend on him. Michelangelo was always anxious to avoid the man, because he had been constantly working against the master's interest, and therefore Buonarroti feared lest he might be drawn into some entanglement by the intrigues of such a man. In short, the Florentine colony lost a very fine opportunity for that church, and God knows when they will have such another. And to me it was an indescribable grief. I have desired not to omit to make this brief record, to the end that it may be seen that our Michelangelo always sought to help his fellow countrymen and his friends, and also art. Vasari had scarcely returned to Rome when, before the beginning of the year 1551, the Sangallo faction arranged a conspiracy against Michelangelo, whereby the Pope was to hold an assembly in San Pietro and to summon together the superintendents and all those who had had the charge of the work, in order to show to the Pope, by means of false calumnies, that Michelangelo had ruined that fabric, because he having already built the apse of the king, where there are the 3 chapels, and having executed these with the 3 windows above, they, not knowing what was to be done with the vaulting, with feeble judgment had given the order to Cardinal Salviati and Marcello Cervini, who afterwards became Pope, to understand that San Pietro was being left with a little light. Whereupon, all being assembled, the Pope said to Michelangelo that the deputies declared that the apse would give little light, and he answered, I would like to hear those deputies speak in person. Cardinal Marcello replied, We are here. Then Michelangelo said to him, Monsignore, above these windows in the vaulting, which is to be made of travertine, there are to be 3 others. You have never told us that, said the cardinal. And Michelo answered, I am not obliged, nor do I intend to be obliged, to say either to your highness or to any other person what I am bound or desirous to do. Your office is to obtain the money and guard it from thieves, and the charge of the design for the building you must leave to me. And then, turning to the Pope, he said, Holy Father, you see what my gains are, and that if these fatigues that I endure do not profit me in my mind, I am wasting my time in my work. The Pope, who loved him, laid his hands on his shoulders and said, You shall profit both in mind and in body. Do not doubt it. Michelangelo, Having thus been able to get rid of these persons, the Pope came to love him even more. And he commanded him in Vasari that on the day following they should both present themselves at the Vigna Julia, in which place His Holiness had many discussions with them, and they carried that work almost to the condition of perfect in which it now is. Nor did the Pope discuss or do anything in the matter of design without Michelangelo's advice and judgment. And among other things, since Michelangelo went down with Vasari to visit him, the Pope insisted, once he was at the fountain of the Acqua Vergine with 12 cardinals after Buonarroti had come up, the Pope, I say, insisted very strongly that he should sit beside him, although he sought most humbly to excuse himself, thus always honoring his genius as much as lay in his power. The Pope caused him to make the model of a facade for a palace that His Holiness desired to build beside San Rocco, intending to avail himself of the mausoleum of Augustus for the rest of the masonry, and as a design for a facade, there is nothing to be seen that is more varied, more ornate, or more novel in manner and arrangement. For the reason that, as has been seen in all his works, he never consented to be bound by any law, whether ancient or modern, in matters of architecture, as one who had a brain always able to discover things new and well varied, and in no way less beautiful. That model is now in the possession of Duke Cosimo de' Medici, who had it as a present from Pope Pius IV when he went to Rome, and he holds it among his dearest treasures. That Pope had such respect for Michelangelo that he was constantly taking up his defense against cardinals and others who sought to calumniate him, and he desired that other craftsmen, however able and renowned they might be, should always go to seek him at his house. Such indeed were the regard and reverence that he felt for him, that His Holiness did not venture, lest he might annoy him, to call upon Michelangelo for many works which, although he was old, he could have executed. As far back as the time of Paul III, Michelangelo had made a beginning with the work of refounding under his own direction the Ponte San Maria at Rome, which had been weakened by the constant flow of water and by age, and was falling into ruin. The refounding was contrived by Michelangelo by means of caissons, and by making stout reinforcements against the piers, and already he had carried a great part of it to completion, and had spent large sums on wood and travertine on behalf of the work, when, in the time of Julius III, an assembly was held by the clerks of the chamber with a view to making an end of it, and a proposal was made among them by architect Nanni di Baccio Biggio, saying that if it were allotted by contract to him, it would be finished in a short time and without much expense. And this they suggested on the pretext, as it were, of doing a favor to Michelangelo and relieving him of a burden, because he was old, alleging that he gave no thought to it, and that if matters remained as they were, the end would never be seen. The Pope, who little liked being troubled, not thinking what the results might be, gave authority to the clerks of the chamber that they should have charge of the work as a thing pertaining to them. And then, without Michelangelo hearing another word about it, they gave it with all these materials without any conditions to Nanni, who gave no attention to the reinforcements which were necessary for the refounding, but relieved the bridge of some weight in consequence of having seen a great quantity of travertine wherewith it had been flanked and faced in ancient times, the result of which was to give weight to the bridge and make it stouter, stronger, and more secure. In place of that, he used gravel and other materials cast with cement in such a manner that no defect could be seen in the inner part of the work, and on the outer side he made parapets and other things, insomuch as that to the eye it appeared as if made altogether new. But it was made lighter over all, and weakened throughout. 5 years afterward, when the flood of the year 1557 came down, it happened that the bridge collapsed in such a manner as to make known the little judgment of the clerks of the chamber and the loss that Rome suffered by departing from the counsel of Michelangelo, who predicted the ruin of the bridge many times to me and to his other friends. Thus I remembered that he said to me when we were passing there together on horseback, "Giorgio, this bridge is shaking under us. Let us spur our horses, or it may fall down while we are upon it." But to return to the narrative interrupted above, when the work of the Montorio was finished, and that much to my satisfaction, I returned to Florence to re-enter the service of Duke Cosimo, which was in the year 1554. The departure of Vasari grieved Michelangelo, and likewise Giorgio, for the reason that Michelangelo's adversaries kept harassing him every day, now in one way, now in another. Wherefore they did not fail to write to one another daily, and in April of the same year, Vasari, giving him the news that Leonardo, the nephew of Michelangelo, had had a male child, that they had accompanied him to baptism with an honorable company of most noble ladies, and that they had revived the name of Buonarroti Michelangelo, answered in a letter to Vasari in these words, quote, "Dear friend Giorgio, I've had the greatest pleasure from your letter, seeing that you still remember the poor old man, and even more because you were present at the triumph which, as you write, you witnessed in the birth of another Buonarroti, for which intelligence I thank you with all my heart and soul. But so much pomp does not please me, for a man should not be laughing when all the world is weeping. It seems to me that Leonardo should not make so much rejoicing over a new birth with all that gladness which should be reserved for the death of one who has lived well. Do not marvel if I delay to answer. I do it so as not to appear a merchant. As for the many praises that you send me in your letter, I tell you that if I deserved a single one of them, it would appear to me that in giving myself to you body and soul, I had truly given you something, and had discharged some infinitesimal part of the debt that I owe you. Whereas I recognize you every hour as my creditor for more than I can repay, and since I am an old man, I can now never hope to be able to square an account in this life, but perhaps in the next. Wherefore, I pray you have patience and remain wholly yours. Things here are as much as usual." Close quote. Already in the time of Paul III, Duke Cosimo had sent Tribolo to Rome to see if he might be able to persuade Michelangelo to return to Florence in order to give completion to the sacristy of San Lorenzo. But Michelangelo excused himself because, having grown old, he could not support the burden of such fatigues, and demonstrated to him with many reasons that he could not leave Rome. Whereupon Tribolo finally asked him about the staircase of the library of San Lorenzo, for which Michelangelo had caused many stones to be prepared, and there was no model of it nor any certainty as to the exact form. And although there were some marks on a pavement and some other sketches in clay, the true and final design could not be found. However, no matter how much Tribolo might beseech him and invoke the name of the Duke, Michelangelo would never answer a word, save he remembered nothing of it. Orders were given to Vasari by Duke Cosimo that he should write to Michelangelo, requesting him to write saying what final form that staircase was to have, in the hope that through the friendship and love that he bore to Vasari, he would say something that might lead to some solution and to the completion of the work. Vasari wrote to Michelangelo, the mind of the Duke, and saying that the execution of all that was to be done would fail to him. which he would do with that fidelity and care with which, as Michelangelo knew, he was wont to treat such of his works as he had in charge. Wherefore Michelangelo sent the directions for making the above-named staircase in a letter by his own hand on the 28th of September, 1555. Quote, Messer Giorgio, dear friend, concerning the staircase for the library, of which so much has been said to me, you may believe that if I could remember how I had designed it, I would not need to be entreated. There does indeed come back to my mind, like a dream, a certain staircase, but I do not believe that it is exactly the one which I conceived at that time, because it comes out so stupid. However, I will describe it here. Take a quantity of oval boxes, each 1 palm in depth, but not of equal length and breadth. The first and largest place on the pavement at such a distance from the wall of the door as may make the staircase easy or steep, according to your pleasure. Upon this place another, which must be so much smaller in every direction as to leave on the first one below as much space as the foot requires in ascending, diminishing and drawing back the steps one after another toward the door in accord with the ascent. And the diminution of the last step must reduce it to the proportion of the space of the door. The said part of the staircase with the oval steps must have 2 wings, one on one side and one on the other, with corresponding steps, but not oval. Of these, the central flight will serve as the principal staircase, and from the center of this staircase to the top of the curves of the said wings shall meet the wall. But from the center down to the pavement they shall stand, together with the whole staircase, at a distance of about 3 palms from the wall, in such a manner that the basement of the vestibule shall not be obstructed in any part, and every face shall be left free. I am writing nonsense, but I know well that you will find something to your purpose. Close quote. Michelangelo also wrote to Vasari in those days that Julius III being dead and Marcellus elected, the faction that was against him, in consequence of the election of the new pontiff, had again begun to harass him. Without hearing and not liking these ways, the Duke caused Giorgio to write and tell him that he should leave Rome and come to live in Florence, where the Duke did not desire more than his advice and designs at times for his buildings, and that he would receive from that lord all that he might desire, without doing anything with his own hand. Again, there were carried to him by Messer Leonardo Marinozzi, the private chamberlain of Duke Cosimo, letters written by his Excellency, and also by Vasari. But then, Marcellus being dead, and Paul IV having been elected, by whom once again numerous offers had been made to him from the very beginning, when he went to kiss his feet, the desire to finish the fabric of San Pietro, and the obligation by which he thought himself bound to that task, kept him back, and employing certain excuses, he wrote to the Duke that for the time being he was not able to serve him, and to Vasari a letter in these very words, quote, Messer Giorgio, my dear friend, I call God to witness how it was against my will and under the strongest compulsion that I was set to the building of San Pietro in Rome by Pope Paul III 10 years ago. Had they continued the work at that fabric up to the present day, as they were doing then, I would now have reached such a point in the undertaking that I might be thinking of returning home. But for want of money it has been much retarded, and is still being retarded at the time when it has reached the most laborious and difficult stage, inasmuch that to abandon it now would be nothing short of the greatest possible disgrace and sin, losing the reward of the labors that I have endured in those 10 years for the love of God. I have made you this discourse in answer to your letter, and also because I have a letter from the Duke that has made me marvel much at his Excellency should have deigned to write so graciously, for which I thank God and His Excellency to the best of my power and knowledge. I wander from the subject because I have lost my memory and my wits, and writing is a great affliction to me, for it is not yet my art. The conclusion is this: to make you understand what would be the result if I were to abandon this fabric and depart from Rome. Firstly, I would please a number of thieves, and secondly, I would be the cause of its ruin, and perhaps also of its being suspended forever. Close quote. Continuing to write to Giorgio, Michelangelo said to him to excuse himself from the Duke, that he had a house and many convenient things at his disposal in Rome, which were worth thousands of crowns, in addition to being in danger of his life from disease and the kidneys, colic, and the stone, as happens to every old person, and as could be proved by Maestro Rialdo and his physician, from whom he congratulated himself on having his life after God. That for these reasons he was not able to leave Rome, and finally that he had no heart for anything but death. He besought Vasari, as he did in several other letters that Giorgio has by his hand, that he should recommend him to the Duke for pardon, in addition to what he wrote to the Duke, as I have said, to excuse himself. If Michelangelo had been able to ride, he would have gone straight away to Florence, whence I believe he would never have consented to depart in order to return to Rome. So much was he influenced by the tenderness and love that he felt for the Duke. But meanwhile, he gave his attention to working at many parts of the above-named fabric in order to fix the form that it might never again be changed. During this time, certain persons had informed him that Pope Paul IV was minded to make him alter the facade of the chapel where the Last Judgment is, because, he said, those figures showed their nakedness too shamelessly. When, therefore, the mind of the Pope was made known to Michelangelo, he answered, "Tell the Pope that it is no great affair, and that it can be altered with ease. Let him put the world right, and every picture will be put right in a moment." The office of the Chancellery of Rimini was taken away from Michelangelo, but he would never speak of this to the Pope, who did not know it, and it was taken away from him by the Pope's cup-bearer, who sought to have 100 crowns a month given to him in respect of the fabric of San Pietro, and caused a month's payment not to be taken to his house, but Michelangelo would not accept it. In the same year took place the death of Urbino, his servant, or rather, as he may be called, as he had been, his companion. This man came to visit with Michelangelo in Florence in the year 1530, after the siege was finished, when his disciple Antonio Mini went to France, and he rendered very faithful service to Michelangelo, insomuch that in 26 years that faithful and intimate service had brought it about that Michelangelo made him rich and so loved him, that in this Urbino's last illness, old as he was, he nursed him and slept in his clothes at night to watch over him. Wherefore, after he was deaf, Vasari wrote to Michelangelo to console him, and he answered in these words, quote, "My dear Messer Giorgio, I am scarce able to write, but in reply to your letter I shall say something. You know how Urbino died, wherein God has shown me very great grace, although it has been also a grave loss and intimate grief to me. This grace is that whereas when living he kept me alive, dying he has taught me to die not with regret, but with a desire for death. I have had him 26 years, and have found him a very rare and faithful servant. And now, when I had made him rich, and was looking to him as the staff and repose of my old age, he has flown from me. Nor is any hope left to me but to see him again in paradise. And of this God has granted a sign in the happy death that he died, in that dying grieved him much less than leaving me in this traitorous world with so many afflictions. although the greatest part of me is gone with him, and nothing is left me but infinite misery. I commend myself to you." Close quote. Michelangelo was employed in the time of Pope Paul IV on many parts of the fortifications of Rome, and also by Salustio Peruzzi, to whom that pope, as has been related elsewhere, had given the charge of executing the great portal of the Castello di Sangallo, which is now half ruined, and he occupied himself in distributing the statues of that work, examining the models of the sculptors, and correcting them. At one time the French army approached near Rome, and Michelangelo thought that he was like to come to an evil end together with the city. Whereupon he resolved to fly from Rome with Antonio Franzese of Casteldurante, whom Urbino at his death had left in his house as his servant, and went secretly to the mountains of Spoleto, where he visited certain seats of hermits. Meanwhile, Vasari wrote to him, sending him a little work that Carlo Lenzoni, a citizen of Florence, had left at his death to Messer Cosimo Bartoli, who was to have had it printed and dedicated to Michelangelo, which, when it was finished, Vasari sent in those days to Michelangelo, and he, having received it, answered thus, quote, September 18, 1556. Messer Giorgio, dear friend, I have received Messer Cosimo's little book which you sent to me, and this shall be a letter of thanks. I pray you give them to him and send him my compliments. I have had in these days great discomfort and expense, but also great pleasure in visiting the hermits in the mountains of Spoleto, insomuch that less than half of me has returned to Rome, seeing that in truth there is no peace to be found save in the woods. I have nothing more to tell you. I am glad that you are well and happy, and I commend myself to you. Close quote. Michelangelo used to work almost every day, as a pastime, at that block of the 4 figures of which we have already spoken. Each block he broke into pieces at this time for these reasons, either because it was hard and full of emery, and the chisel often struck sparks from it, or it may have been that the judgment of the man was so great that he was never content with anything that he did. A proof that this is true is that there are few finished statues to be seen out of all he executed in the prime of his manhood, and that those completely finished ones were executed by him in his youth, such as the Bacchus, the Pietà in San Maria della Febbre, the Giant of Florence, and the Christ of the Minerva, which could not be possible to increase or diminish by as little as a grain of millet without spoiling them. And the others, with the exception of the Dukes Giuliano and Lorenzo, Night, Dawn, Moses, with the other 2, the whole number of these statues not amounting in all to 11, the others, I say, were all left unfinished, and, moreover, they are many, Michelangelo having been wont to say that if he had to satisfy himself in what he did, he would have sent out few, nay, not one. For he had gone so far with his art and judgment, that when he had laid bare a figure and had perceived it in the slightest degree of error, he would set it aside and run to lay his hand on another block of marble, trusting that the same would not happen to the new block. And he often said that this was the reason that he gave for executing so few statues and pictures. This Pietà, when it was broken, he presented to Francesco Bandini. Now at this time, Tiberio de Calagni, a Florentine sculptor, had become much the friend of Michelangelo by means of Francesco Bandini and Messer Donato Giannati. And being one day in Michelangelo's house, where there was the Pietà all broken, after a long conversation, he asked him for what reason he had broken it up and destroyed labors so marvelous. And he answered that the reason was the importunity of his servant Urbino, who kept urging him every day to finish it. Besides which, other things, a piece of one of the elbows of the Madonna had broken off, and even before that he had taken an aversion to it, and had had many misfortunes with it by reasons of a flaw that was in the marble, so that he lost his patience and began to break it up, and he would have broken it altogether into pieces if his servant Antonio had not besought him that he should present it to him as it was. Whereupon Tiberio, having heard this, spoke to Bandini, who desired to have something by the hand of Michelangelo, and Bandini contrived that Tiberio should promise to Antonio 200 crowns of gold, and prayed Michelangelo to consent that Tiberio should finish it for Bandini with the assistance of models by his hand, urging that thus his labor would not be thrown away. Michelangelo was satisfied, and then made them a present of it. The work was carried away immediately, and then put together again, and constructed with I know not what new pieces by Tiberio. But it was left unfinished by reason of the death of Bandini, Michelangelo, and Tiberio. At the present day it is in the possession of Pier Antonio Bandini, the son of Francesco, at his villa on Monte Cavallo. But to return to Michelangelo, it became necessary to find some work in marble on which he might be able to pass some time every day with the chisel. And another piece of marble was put before him, from which another Pietà had already been blocked out, different from the first and much smaller.